Peace Corps Community for Refugees is an all-volunteer organization, primarily for returned Peace Corps volunteers who share a huge concern for refugees and asylees, especially having been ourselves personally welcomed by people throughout the world when we served as Peace Corps volunteers. We're trying to respond to the needs of new migrants in our country and the legal issues related to them. As we start, we'd like to suggest you add your own name, location, and country of service, if you're a former Peace Corps volunteer, in the chat section on the Zoom. I served on this advocacy team since we began it about 6 years ago, and for some 20 years previously had served on the NPCA Peace Corps Advocacy Team. Helping organize and lead tonight's forum are two current co-chairs of the Peace Corps Community for Refugees, Ann Baker and Evelyn Ganslas, and our communications chair, Christine DeSasio. Many of you know Ann from the many years on the leadership of the National Peace Corps Association, and perhaps also Evelyn, who served on the NPCA Board of Directors. We especially thank Ann for coordinating our Zoom tonight and sending out the advance notices. I think without her, we would be in a coma as an organization. For nearly 2 years, the advocacy team has focused on pushing for passage of two major bills in Congress, the Afghan Adjustment Act and Let Asylees Work legislation. Neither has succeeded yet, despite pushing from many other sources, especially Afghan war veterans for the first one, and Chamber of Commerce and businesses across the nation for the second bill. So as we approach the second half of this current year, political prognosticators, including some who will be presenting tonight, suggested the best chance for success could be after the recent election, when Congress has several must-pass pieces of legislation to which either or both of these bills might be attached. I think we all realize the passage of such legislation under the new Congress next year will really be remote. So we think the only opportunity exists now, and we'd like to hear from people as to how we make that happen. So we've arranged for tonight's section and asked some leaders who have been deeply involved in both issues to participate. I would like to ask each of the presenters to first just introduce themselves briefly and the organization in which they have a leadership role and what it does. First, I'll ask Ashley from the Global Refuge.
Hi, thanks so much for inviting Global Refuge to participate tonight, and also just for many of you for your continued advocacy with us. I'm Ashley Feasley. I'm the Vice President of Policy and Advocacy at Global Refuge, formerly Lutheran Immigration Refugee Services. We're a national service organization. We provide assistance and partnership to the federal government, resettling refugees, care for unaccompanied children, and we also run an alternatives to detention program in partnership with the Department of Homeland Security. Global Refuge, on its own direct service and through its affiliates, operates in all 50 states, and we have over 75 partners nationally. And we also, have our background from the Lutheran Church and very much do honor that biblical call to welcome. So thanks so much for inviting me, and I look forward to discussing more with you.
Excellent. And next we'll have Dan Colston, an RPCV from Congo, who's with the National Immigration Forum. Dan.
Thank you, Richard, and good evening, everyone. My name is Dan Costin, and I work at the National Immigration Forum. I'm part of the policy and advocacy team there at the National Immigration Forum. And part of my portfolio is Afghan Adjustment and the Afghan Adjustment Act. And I will be addressing that particular subject this evening.
Thank you. Next, we'll be talking about the Asylum Seeker Work Authorization Act with Christina and her staff, and many contacts have been working on. Christina, please welcome.
Thank you so much, Richard. Hi, everyone. My name is Christina Moreno. I'm Policy Counsel for the Asylum Seeker Advocacy Project, which I'll refer to as ASAP tonight. ASAP is a membership organization made up of people seeking asylum in the United States. And we work alongside our members, which right now is over 650,000 asylum seekers to build a more welcoming United States. So I'll be talking more about ASAP and ASAP members' priorities, as well as the Asylum Seeker Work Authorization Act tonight. Thanks again.
Excellent. And then from the House of Representatives, we have the legislative correspondent for Representative Shelley Pingree from Maine, Corinne Lottie.
Hi there, everyone. I'm Corinne Laddie. I work for Congresswoman Shelley Pingree's office. I've been with the office for just over 5 years now, and I handle a portfolio that includes immigration, homeland security, defense, and foreign affairs. So I'm very excited to be here with you guys tonight. I have not been a Peace Corps volunteer, but we do have Peace Corps volunteers on our staff. So have all the respect for the work that you guys do and continue to do.
Thank you. And here's another Peace Corps volunteer, Dr. Michael Roman, who is with the Peace Corps for Environmental Action. And he'll be presenting the topic of the Climate Displaced Persons Act, which is also pending in Congress. Go ahead, Michael.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for having me speak on behalf of the CDPA as well as our PCVs for Environmental Action. The CDPA, or Climate Displaced Persons Act, that I'll be talking about tonight, really bridges the two major areas of focus between us two groups. So when we talk about the community for refugees and the Organization for Environmental Action within Peace Corps affiliate groups, this legislation brings both of those together in a way that hits home to me, because I served in the nation of Kiribati, one of the smallest nations in the world, or biggest oceanic states, but also one of the most impacted by climate change, as we have 14 youth at COP29 right now, screaming and dancing and yelling their voices for the world to hear.
Great. All right, let's begin by focusing on the Afghan Adjustment Act. We have two presentations and comments. We've asked each to provide a summary of 10 minutes or so, and then allow for 5 minutes of questions or discussion following that. Tonight, we want to focus on what can be attempted for action this year, since these proposals will undoubtedly be facing stronger opposition next year. Go ahead, Ashley, please.
Sure, thanks. So I'm going to talk most of my time about the Afghan Adjustment Act, but I'm also going to talk a little bit about appropriations, since it's so linked to, frankly, serving a lot of the people that would be impacted by the Afghan Adjustment Act. And it is one of the major things that we are anticipating, as we move towards Congress's funding deadline on December 20th. So thanks again, and, very happy, I think, to be here to speak with you. So just to give a little bit of background, because I know Dan and I are sharing this issue, the Afghan Adjustment Act is a bill that would provide a pathway to lawful permanent resident status for Afghans who were evacuated in 2021 during the Taliban takeover and the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. The bill, in addition to that, would also improve consular processing and congressional oversight of continued relocation efforts for those left behind. I think it's really important to understand that, we've all heard a lot about, the withdrawal out of Afghanistan, many different opinions about how well it was executed. But one of the things that's undoubted is people were really fleeing for their lives. They were really doing what they could to leave. And many of the paths came to the United States, in part because of the engagement with the U.S. military, the planes that were evacuating, both government affiliated and also private, the lily pads. It was a chaotic time. And because of this, we saw a number of Afghan arrivals who came in various statuses. So yes, we saw some refugees, we saw some individuals who were special immigrant visa holders, we also saw some individuals who had parole. The Afghan evacuees who were admitted on parole, which is a grant of admission into the United States, but does not grant regularized status, they, still are without a solution. Parole is at the discretion of the executive branch. So they have been given that by the Biden administration, but we are uncertain about what this means facing a Trump administration. And in the intervening 3 years, some Afghans who were in the parole category have been granted asylum or adjusted their status based on special immigrant visas, but many have not achieved a lasting status. So we have people here who have given their lives, put themselves and their families in danger, and are here not knowing what tomorrow will bring in terms of their ability to stay in this country in a regularized permanent status and continue to contribute to our country and our communities. So, you know, I think we're aware of some of the interest of the bill and why and the background, but there are, I think, a number of obstacles and kind of some asks that we have of you. The bill really does have a remarkable amount of support from faith-based organizations, veterans groups, and those who work, you know, in the national security space and the priorities relating to Afghan, whether it be women's rights or the freedom of the press. And as a result, we see a remarkable bipartisan support on the Hill, both Republican and Democrat co-sponsors in both the House and the Senate, and a real assiduous effort to make sure that it's truly bipartisan. I think one of the things that we've seen is, despite the remarkable coalition of individuals, many of whom you know, who have done work at the national level and the local level, the bill and the effort on passage of the Afghan Adjustment Act has faced questions and concerns about the vetting that has occurred and that should occur for Afghan arrivals, in part due to some of the chaos that we've seen, but also just that there's no formal vetting mechanism for Afghans currently under US law. And so this is why one of the elements of this bill is so important, you know, addressing some of the vetting that's needed, making sure that there's more meaningful contact for some of the arrived Afghans with the United States government. This bill would achieve that. So I do want to just pivot quickly to where we are in the state of play. There is a compromise version of the Afghan Adjustment Act called Fulfilling Promises to Afghan Allies. This version of the bill has been proposed as an amendment for the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, and the annual defense bill that Congress must take up. Our current advocacy has been encouraging offices, particularly senators with influence in the NDAA process, because of their personal background of being a veteran or perhaps their work on the Armed Services Committee, to push for this amendment to be included in the NDAA. Why are we using this as a vehicle? So the reason that we're working to use the NDAA is because it's a must-pass piece of legislation. The Senate and the House must move forward with the defense authorization. And we know that this is one of the few bills that really will leave Congress and land in the president's desk. And of course, given the amazing kind of intelligence community and military ties that this particular bill has with the US government's work in Afghanistan, it is definitely germane to the work of the NDAA and authorizing our military. So why now? I think it's important to understand that this lame duck period is certainly a quieter but a discrete time to achieve a version of the Afghan Adjustment Act, particularly this amendment, the Fulfilling Promises to Afghan Allies. And this kind of mimics what we saw Congress pushing in December of 2022, when there was last a big effort to move forward with passing it. You know, advocates like ourselves will continue to push for a broad spectrum of protections for Afghans who are at risk in the United States, from the Fulfilling Promises Afghan Allies Amendment, the known as FPAA, to looking at Coordinator for Afghan Relocation Efforts, or the CARE Authorization Act of 2024. We're doing this for a number of reasons, but one of them is there's a real need to ensure that these individuals are moved forward in a regular status and know with certainty for themselves and their families. And of course, I think are able to submit themselves to the important background checks and vetting that is needed. So I am going to just stop there. I know Dan's going to do a little bit about the Afghan Adjustment Act as well. You know, it is our hope to move this forward at the NDAA. And we do have an action alert. I can put it in the chat for you. But I wanted to just take 1 minute to talk about another thing that we are really focused on that also impacts Afghans and a bunch of other populations of immigrants and refugees that we serve. And that is the issue of funding our Office of Refugee Resettlement. Many of the special immigrant visa holders, the refugees from Afghans, and certain parolees, unfortunately not Afghan parolees, are funded from this account, and we are critically short. This is the other priority that we are really working on these days, is to try and ensure that we are making our point to lawmakers about the short funding. You know, particularly, I think, helping lawmakers understand that even if President-elect Trump does slash the refugee resettlement program, there are still many people here in the United States who are eligible for that funding and who need that funding to ensure that they can move forward with, you know, job training and cultural orientation, you know, English as a second language classes, all things that make them better integrated into their community and better able to serve our communities as well as support their families. So I pause there. I don't want to take up too much time. I know Dan will do some great work on the Afghan Adjustment Act, but I'm happy to answer any questions on this or the appropriations, and I will put our information in the chat if you're interested. We will be talking more about this in our Global Refuge National Call on December 3rd as well. We continue this work. Richard is an important part of the coalition, and we invite you to participate as well. Thank you.
Okay,
Yes,
Ash.
and we'll share the information from the chat with you in an email probably tomorrow to everybody. I see
Okay.
one question that was
Yeah.
raised. How many of the 70,000 or more Afghans who were evacuated are still without some type of permanent status in the U.S.? Do we have an estimate?
That is a great question. Let me use the time right now to get an answer for you. Hold on.
Okay.
I have my numbers and I'll get you the notes.
All right, and then let's have Dan pick up where we are, and then we'll have more time for questions. Dan, go ahead.
Thank you very much. And Ashley covered it extremely well. I'm just going to try and highlight a couple things. One is that this is not something new. I think it's important for you who will be advocating around this to understand that in past conflicts in which there was an evacuation, Congress has had to pass similar type adjustment acts. So after Cuba, Vietnam, the two Iraq conflicts, after each one of these conflicts and evacuations, Congress has passed an adjustment act for those who were brought to the United States. So this is not an issue of whether or not Congress should do this. This is more an issue of when they will do it. Inevitably, it has been done for each one of those over the past 50 years, and Congress will need to do this again in light of the fact that these people were brought into the United States on a status, humanitarian parole, that is only a temporary status and does not lead to any kind of permanent pathway to legalization in the United States. So the issue here is that this is not a precedent. This is something that Congress has done in the past and therefore will need to do again for this particular situation for the Afghan allies. The second thing I'd like to highlight is simply this, that for those who have served in the military and are serving in the military, this is not an immigration bill. This is a national security bill. For those individuals, they enter these conflict zones promising those who assist them that they will protect them and inevitably try their utmost to provide them with some kind of permanent solution. Now it's going on the fourth year in which that has not happened. For many of them, this is a matter of keeping their word to those who assisted them. For those who continue to serve in the military, they are concerned about the signal and the message this sends to those who they would want to assist them in conflict zones. If the U.S. is not going to remain faithful to a promise made, then why should they assist the United States when they may risk their lives in so doing? So I just want to point out for many, this has nothing to do with immigration. This has to do with our national security. And then lastly, just this afternoon, before this call, I spoke with a staffer in Senator Klobuchar's office, who is the lead on the Afghan Adjustment Act in the Senate. And they very much are actively pursuing passage of the Afghan adjustment, actually the fulfilling promises to Afghan allies through the National Defense Authorization Act. Currently, and this is somewhat technical, there is what we call a marker or a bill that is a placeholder bill in the NDAA on the Senate side, which they're hoping that in the conferencing process will provide the ability to include the Fulfilling Promises to Afghan Allies Act. And Senator Klobuchar's staff provided me with a list of target offices that they are targeting, and they would ask that we also target. And Richard, I'll make sure that you get that list of target offices, but their primary objective is to target leadership, both in the Senate and the House, because ultimately this will come to leadership to make a decision as to whether or not something of this nature would be included in the National Defense Authorization Act. And I'm gonna stop there, Richard. I guess one thing I will add is there is another thing in light of the fact that this group advocates on behalf of refugees. There is an attempt to see whether or not some type of legislation can be passed during the lame duck that would create a floor, meaning that the president would be obligated to at least bring in a certain number of refugees, in light of the concern that in Trump's last term, he significantly lowered the number of individuals who were admitted, and that by setting some kind of floor, he would not be able to go beneath a certain number. There was an act called the Grace Act, which attempted to set that number at 125,000. Many things that, in light of the current Republican party's control of the House, Senate, and the presidency, that probably is somewhat higher than what would be acceptable to most Republicans. So the question ultimately is, what is the floor number? But ultimately, the objective is to set a floor to prevent the program from being zeroed out completely. And I'll stop there.
Yeah, I've heard that the floor proposed is 50,000, so we at least have that many that could be admitted, but that's probably flexible. Well, we're looking for questions. If you have a question or comment, please use the react button, raise your hand. We'll see what you have to ask or what you have to add. We will watch, or perhaps use the chat if you prefer. Well, it's a lot of information there. So actually, both Ashley and Dan, please forward me things that you think should be shared with our team, especially on the Fulfilling Promises Act, because that sounds like that has a better option than the Afghan Adjustment Act by itself. Would you agree? See a question from Paul Fishstein. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Thanks, Ashley and Dan, for really good presentation. A couple of questions, I guess, for either of you. Ashley, you had mentioned that there's no current vetting mechanism for Afghans. Can you talk about that a bit? What exactly does that mean? Because those of us who have helped certain people through the SIV process are aware that there is some sort of vetting, but I don't actually know what that means. The other question is the FPAA, is that AAA light? Will this end up being a compromise, maybe a necessary one, but a compromise that will end up falling far short or somewhat short of where people want to be? So those are my two questions. And
I'll
thanks.
add that Paul's a former Peace Corps volunteer in Afghanistan. Now let's see some answers.
Yeah, sure. So indeed was vetting, and when individuals were brought over, some of it was probably not as ideal as we would like given the circumstance. But at the time, I worked at the Department of Homeland Security, and I can tell you that there was vetting. When I meant that there was no vetting, there's currently no ongoing vetting, and without a bill like this that has the ability, frankly, to do the cross-referencing of databases that the intelligence community has, there wouldn't be any more. A bill like this would put people through a multi-agency vetting process. We note that this is really important because, you know, we've heard that there are security concerns. And I think one of the ironies of this whole thing is passing this bill would actually bring people who did have an initial vetting of some degree under more government scrutiny. And that is a good thing in terms of being thorough in the vetting, and that's what this would do. So I'm sorry if I wasn't clear. There's no current ongoing vetting for individuals, particularly in the parole status at this time, whereas if we were to move forward with this bill, we would have more agency engagement and review, which I think we all think is a good thing, including, you know, the many Afghans who've been advocating for it. Is that helpful?
Yeah, just to clarify, Ashley, when you say no vetting now, that means of people who are already here?
Yes.
And so how does it affect people who would be coming here on SIV or some other channel?
So they go through vetting as well. I just think it's important to understand the processes with the fall of Afghanistan. Vetting occurred, but frankly, it was a chaotic process. All we're noting is passing this bill for those people who are concerned about national security provides more national security because it enables these individuals to submit themselves to further vetting from a multi-agency review process. If individuals come now in an SIV process, they are vetted through the SIV process. But because some of the individuals came, for example, in parole, or they came from a lily pad, you know, some of the bases in Qatar and other places, you know, there hasn't been the type of vetting back that, you know, we would want as we were trying to adjust people. Moving forward on the Afghan Adjustment Act or this amendment would be helpful in that process. And so that I think is an important point just for us to make. I also think it's a really important thing. You know, many of us have worked with Afghans, and it sounds like you have extensive experience. I think, you know, the number of Afghans that I've seen personally advocate for this bill, understanding that they will submit themselves to a rigorous Department of Homeland Security multi-agency process, is also an endorsement for this is a step to do the right thing for people, but also a good step for our national security.
I see one other question. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, then on the amendment, so Dan can speak a little bit more about this, but this is one of these things I think that Washington people do. It's a package to get into another package, and it is the Afghan Adjustment Act for all purposes. It is the form that the coalition, you know, I mentioned this multi-pronged coalition moved forward to ensure that they could move, you know, into the NDAA. There is a compromise in that it's a conditional lawful permanent resident process, and individuals would gain, you know, lawful permanent residency on a conditional basis. But again, it is in very much, you know, a lot of the form and the ideas of the Afghan Adjustment Act.
I have another question, but Dan, please go ahead first.
Yeah, Paul, I would just say this: the fulfilling promises is not a light version; it's actually a heavy version of the Afghan. It's actually adds to some of the requirements. It doesn't reduce the requirements. Instead of granting somebody legal permanent status, it grants them conditional permanent resident status, 4 years. Basically, depending on how long they've been here, they will retain the conditional permanent resident status for a period of time until they can have full legal permanent status in the U.S. So this is not a watered down version. It's actually a version that helped more Republicans get onto the bill.
The other question is from Lizette Peter, formerly of Peace Corps staff. Is there any risk of those on SIV being denied extensions and required to leave the U.S.?
Dan, I'll start first. I mean, I think a new administration, has large purview on immigration issues. It is an executive, power. They have the right to review all programs and assess, on a case-by-case basis for things. I don't think in what we're doing to prepare for President-elect Trump, we are focusing on this. I wouldn't say it's off the table, but I wouldn't say it's a first day priority action. And that's as candid as I can be in terms of, what we are anticipating. This is not something that we're seeing, I think, first day. Dan, I don't know if you have more to add.
Yeah, I would say anyone who has secured SIV status, I don't have many, if any, concerns whatsoever. I would say I have concerns for those who are in the process as to how many more people will actually secure SIV status. So for those who've already been through it and granted SIV status, I think the risk is very low. But I would say anybody who has not yet completed the process, the question being how many more would they allow to be granted SIV status?
All right, thank you. We'll follow up these issues. I see Annie Jasinski. Do you have a quick question?
Hi, I just want to note I am a retired director of refugee resettlement here in Cincinnati, Ohio. And just to clarify, once you have an SIV, that gives you automatically grants you permanent residency in the U.S. So what would need to happen is the president-elect would need to issue something that would deny them and take away their permanent residency status. And I think that would create a huge lawsuit and create all sorts of problems, especially for Afghan nationals who have supported our military.
All right, thanks for adding that. Let's move on to the other piece of legislation we've been trying to promote for the past couple of years. Cristina Moreno has moderated biweekly discussions about work authorization issues for immigrants and especially asylees. It's focused on trying to prepare scenarios also in advance of the election to consider pursuing now, depending upon the results of the election. And they're pulling plans together to push for some of these before the end of this presidential term. Cristina, please, you're welcome. Please tell us a little more about what your focus has been, how we can help.
Thanks again, Richard. Hi, everyone. I'm going to share a little bit more about ASAP members, their policy priorities, and then give some background about the Asylum Seeker Work Authorization Act, why the bill is so important, share a little bit about our advocacy from the past year, and then turn things over to Corinne to talk more about where we are in Congress right now. So as I shared earlier, ASAP is a membership organization. ASAP members are seeking asylum. ASAP membership is very diverse. Members have come from over 175 countries. They live all across the United States and all 50 states. What does ASAP membership look like? To give you an idea, ASAP members sign up and connect online. ASAP membership is completely free. They have access to in-depth online resources, a virtual legal help desk, as well as monthly updates and breaking news alerts about the immigration and asylum process. ASAP members also collectively guide our priorities as an organization. Members vote, participate in surveys, and collectively set our vision. And ASAP members have also spoken out in the media, participated in litigation and advocacy efforts. So what are ASAP members' collective priorities? We've asked our members, what is one thing you would change about the asylum process? And of ASAP's first 600,000 members, 118,000 have responded, and ASAP staff reads every single response. The number one priority is that the government should speed up processing times for work permits and asylum interviews. The second priority is that work permits and Social Security numbers should be easier to obtain. And the third priority is that the asylum process should be more accessible and transparent. And you can see the full list of priorities on our website. Some other priorities include that it should be easier to get immigration status and to win asylum, and that asylum seekers should be treated more humanely. But what we've heard and what ASAP members have consistently said is that speeding up access to a work permit is one of their top priorities. And ASAP members have shared some thoughts about work permit processing and access to work permits. So I'm just going to briefly read 3 quotes from ASAP members about things that they've said about access to work authorization. So the first quote is, "I have been waiting a really long time. I see all these businesses needing employees, and I would like to work, but I can't." And that's from an ASAP member from Uganda. "We all have children, and they depend on us for food, shelter, and other basic necessities. Without a work permit, we are unable to provide for them." And that's from an ASAP member from Haiti. "Without a social security number that comes with a work permit, it is impossible to buy health insurance and receive medical treatment." And that's from an ASAP member from Russia. So what benefits does a work permit provide, and why is this legislation so important? You know, as ASAP members have explained, work permits are critical for people seeking asylum to be able to take care of themselves and their families, access stable housing, access medical care, and so many other critical services. And at the same time, people seeking asylum are also filling key labor shortages across the United States. One other thing to note is that work permits also help people to obtain a driver's license, which is critical for daily life in so many parts of the United States, and professional licenses. So we've heard from ASAP members who are truck drivers who rely on commercial driver's licenses, who are therapists and doctors who also rely on professional licenses, which can only be obtained and maintained with a valid work permit. Which brings us to the Asylum Seeker Work Authorization Act. I know many of you, I think, are familiar with this bill and have weighed in on this bill. But just to give some background at a high level, the key fix that this bill provides is that it would allow asylum seekers to more quickly obtain a work permit. And the idea behind this bill is an idea that came from ASAP members. ASAP members have shaped this legislation, and so this is an idea that is coming from people who are directly impacted by the proposed changes. And so, as some of you might know, under current law, people who are seeking asylum must wait 6 months after they apply for asylum before they can obtain an initial work permit. And so this bill, the key fix that it provides is to shorten that waiting period to 30 days. So what that means, if someone is seeking asylum, if this bill became law, they would apply for asylum, wait 30 days, and then they would be able to obtain an initial work permit. And it's worth noting that this bill is bipartisan and has bipartisan support. So I'll just turn now to talking a little bit more about what we've been working on over the past year for this bill. I know many of you have been supportive, and it's been heartening to see that there's been a broad coalition of partners who have been weighing in on this bill. So we've seen businesses, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has been supportive of this bill. Faith leaders and unions all support this legislation. And we like to say it's a win-win. You know, it's a win for businesses who are looking for employees, who are looking to fill gaps at their workplace. It's a win for people seeking asylum and their families, as well as for communities across the United States. So this is a priority for ASAP members, for our organization. We are fighting to get this bill passed. And I did just want to mention that about a year ago, ASAP, alongside AILA, Refugees International, and the Refugee Advocacy Lab, launched a campaign called the Let Asylum Seekers Work campaign to build support specifically for HR 1325, which is the House bill of the Asylum Seeker Work Authorization Act. You can read more about the bill on the website, and you can also contact members of Congress through the Take Action platform. You can see all the businesses and organizations who have weighed in support of this bill as well. So I'll go ahead and add the link to the Take Action page in the chat, and happy to answer more questions about this legislation as well and next steps. But thanks again, Richard.
Let's turn to Shelley Pingree's staff and let Corinne share what she thinks, how we might make this happen. Corinne.
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for kind of soft launching this legislation, Christina. Just to kind of go into a little bit further into the bill and what it does. like Christina mentioned, it does take that 6-month, 180 days waiting period and turn it into a 30-day waiting period. And makes it so that asylum seekers can apply for their work authorization permit on the same day that they apply for asylum. From there, USCIS has 30 days to approve or deny their application. Also, under current law, asylees have to renew their work authorization permit every 2 years. It's not uncommon. We have heard from a lot of our constituents, from a lot of national stakeholders, that USCIS is unable to get a decision on the renewal of their work authorization permit before it lapses, and their employment lapses through no fault of their own. So our bill gets rid of that 2-year requirement and ties their work authorization permit to the initial asylum adjudication. We have had a lot of luck kind of when we've been, selling this bill, framing it in 2 different ways. The first way we framed it is as a workforce issue. Maine is experiencing a pretty intense labor shortage, as is the nation. And it kind of seems like a common sense solution. If there's a labor shortage and there's a population that is willing to work, that is able to work, to just connect the two. The other way we framed it is as a dignity issue. It's allowing asylees to work and provide for their family and their loved ones while allowing them to integrate into their community. We really want to emphasize that this bill makes no changes to the actual substantive process of applying for asylum. There are no, restrictions added. There's none taken away. It's simply a timeline change, one that we see takes off a lot of bureaucratic burden on USCIS by getting rid of that 2-year renewal, while also kind of streamlining things for asylees. There have been a few other bills that have been floating around that kind of get at this, the same finish line that ours does. But just to provide a little bit of thought process behind our bill, we've seen some bills that require asylees to enter through ports of entry for this to be an option for them. We kind of took the stance of thinking, they're already in the country, doesn't really solve the problem to add this requirement. Further, we've seen that they keep their 2-year renewal requirement, kind of already been over that, and why we think that might be a little bit more of a burden. As well as bills that we've seen have authorization for more funding be attached. And we've kind of come at it with the approach of trying to get our foot in the door and trying to get this groundwork laid before we start adding funding for USCIS and upping these accounts. So our ask of you, if you are able, is to really reach out to these members of Congress who might be centrist Republicans that might be interested in co-sponsoring this bill. Like Christina mentioned, it is bipartisan. We're very proud of that. Representative Maria Salazar from Florida is our Republican co-sponsor. We're really trying to target judiciary members, really trying to see if we get enough judiciary members onto this bill, might make it a little bit easier to get it past the finish line. As well as building our co-sponsor list, we're really hoping to build our endorsement list, looking at the 119th Congress. My thought process is the broader coalition that we get, the easier it will be to move this bill. So if you are in contact with any advocacy groups outside of this one and that are doing lobbying days on the Hill with their local members of Congress, would really encourage them to speak about this bill. If you're in touch with your local chambers of commerce, that is something that we would also really appreciate. And that's kind of how we're looking ahead to the 119th, knowing that it's going to be a pretty tumultuous time, but we're ready to hit the ground running.
Thank you. We will share a list of the members of the Judiciary Committee with all of you tomorrow, committee both in the Senate and the House, as well as the names of the co-sponsors for these bills. And then we'll update you on the at the Asylum Fulfilling Promises to Afghan Allies Act, which I hadn't yet put together. Plus, any of you who are presenting, please send us information to either directed to me or to info@PCC4R refugees.org, and we will share that with the group as well. There's a lot of details. Plus, the tape of this forum is available, will be available for you to share with your friends in addition. Came to our attention as we prepared for this forum that, oh, are there any questions? Let's go back for the questions. Just raise your hand with the link if there's questions related to that legislation. We're looking, I don't see any. We understand it all, okay. I see Darcy put her hand up physically.
Sorry, I couldn't find
The buttons.
the thing quick enough, you know. This is more about the history, but over the years, given my age, I've seen, you know, Haitian groups of people arrive and Vietnam population grow and so on. Was I didn't realize there were adjustment acts for those. Was the process similarly painful and prolonged, or is there something unusual? Dan, you mentioned those, and it's not relevant to what we need today. I'm just looking for a little perspective on what we're up against.
Anybody?
Yeah, I can answer that. 3 out of the 4 last adjustment acts were passed in 3 years or less. So we are behind if you're looking at it on a comparative basis.
And that's because Congress is rather inactive or stubborn. All right, let's step on to the other topic that came up as we started this presentation. The RPCVs for Environmental Action is promoting another piece of legislation introduced in the House and the Senate this year related to the climate issues that are creating more refugees around the world. Michael Roman, co-chair of that action team, is also a member of our advocacy team, will share some details and urge our participation on this issue as well. Go ahead, Michael.
All right, hello and thank you. I just put a couple of links inside of the chat just for your information. The AAA and the work authorization are very, very important things that we need attention now. What I am proposing might be a little bit different, or what I'm going to talk about might be a little different in the sense that this is a problem that, well, let me begin. Okay, let me start over. I was placed in the Republic of Kiribati in the year 2000. At the time, I had no idea where it was or what it was. I told my recruiter for Peace Corps that I was allergic to fish, I hated hot weather, and was severely prone to motion sickness, especially on boats. So they sent me to the Pacific Islands, a small coral atoll nation in the middle of the world where the international date line crosses the equator. It's a small nation in terms of its land. It is one of the largest oceanic areas. I like to call it a boss state. It is a big oceanic sovereign state, not a small developing island state as it's commonly known in my eyes. When I was there, I was adopted by a family and I still have ties with that family. And my mom, my Kiribati mom, told me that climate change, back then it was global warming, wasn't something to worry about because they are good Christians, they are a Christian nation, and God promised never to flood the earth again. A couple of years later, she told me she would never leave, even though our village got swept under the ocean. She would never leave because there's a cosmological connection that she explained to me. So when she is born on her land, that land has been in the family for thousands of years, generationally passed down from generation to generation to generation. She's born on that land, the land of her ancestors. She lived on that land. She raised family on that land. When she died, she returned to that land. That land that she's on is on a small little atoll island called Abayang, about 20 feet from the ocean. Well, 10 years ago, it was 20 feet from the ocean. She told me when she returned to the land, she was going to go Ikarawa or above to watch and protect over the land with all the ancestors for future generations. Kiribati will never disappear because it will always be protected by the ancestors. But the thing is that the ocean, what we use to live, what we use to survive, the fish, it's our grocery store, is now threatening us. That land that she was buried in gets eaten away year by year by year. The ocean gets hungrier, the tides get higher, and the land gets smaller. It wasn't like it is today when I was a Peace Corps volunteer. That land went out meters and meters and meters beyond what it is today. So that's kind of my introduction to this legislation. The youth that are in Azerbaijan right now, telling their stories, they're echoing the sentiments of my Kiribati mother. They don't want to leave their land. They are part of their land. People are the land and the land are the people. It's not a commodity. It is something that has been in your family for thousands of years. And your identity and your existence is connected to that land. So why am I advocating for the Climate Displaced Persons Act if these people don't want to leave their lands? Well, I'm advocating because in 25 years that I have been involved with this nation, I have seen things that have changed my mind. And I have seen graves be torn up by the ocean. I have seen bones on the beach. These are bones that American soldiers, they fought in World War II. And it's getting easier to recover the Marines from 1943 and the Battle of Tarawa because the land is getting smaller. Well, that same thing is happening to family members from Kiribati. Climate-related events like storms and floods and droughts are increasing throughout the world and across these islands like Kiribati, Tuvalu, Tokelau, the Maldives, the Marshall Islands. The CDPA is designed to address this issue. When the Refugee Convention was created, it gave permission to seek refuge for certain things, and climate was not one of them. Environment was not one of them. The CDPA would address this gap by creating a visa-based process for individuals displaced by climate change to apply for admissions to the United States. But not would it only do that, it would also work to create a global strategy for nations dealing with climate change. Back in 2017, the Labour Party in New Zealand passed or tried to pass a bill that would open a pathway for people from the Pacific Islands to go over into New Zealand. It didn't get any support because the people that was intending to help didn't want it. The CDPA creates a global climate change resilience strategy to coordinate global government issues on supporting frontline communities around the world from the harms of climate change hazards. That is key. That is before we even talk about defining what a climate displaced persons would be. Well, current pathways like the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program and humanitarian parole can be better utilized to offer protection to these populations. A climate-specific pathway codified in the law directly addresses human mobility impacts of climate change. So maybe the best and most important thing for me to highlight here would be that this bill defines what a CDPA is, because there is no such thing as a climate refugee. That is not a legal definition. It has not been legally defined. So we have a CDPA, and it's something that all nations have to define on them in their own cases. In the USA, a CDPA is any person who, for reasons of sudden or progressive change in the environment that adversely affects his or her living conditions, is obliged to leave his or her habitual home, either within his or her country or nationality, or in another country, needs durable resettlement solutions, and whose government cannot or will not provide such durable resettlement solutions. This was introduced first by Senator Markey of Massachusetts and Representative Nadia Velasquez of New York and the 115th Congress. It has not had co-sponsorship in the double digits until this Congress. I am proud to say, even though it's so small compared to every other bill, that we have 19 co-sponsors in the House, and we have 4 co-sponsors in the Senate. I think that is the biggest that we've ever had. We know that people don't listen to the charts and graphs and the numbers. That's the science speaking. That's not the everyday person speaking. What the everyday people listen to and understand, I'm an anthropologist, is the enemic or the emic understanding the conveyance of stories. The storytelling. People know what it's like to be happy. People know what it's like to be hungry. People know what it's like to be sad. People know what it's like to be in fear. The numbers have not worked as we hoped they would, but stories do. So a couple of years ago, I was with one of Representative Velasquez's members, one of her staffers, and she pulled me aside. She said, "Mike, I know you do movies." And I said, "Yeah." She said, "We need a 5-minute movie to reintroduce it." Well, got with one of my friends, and we created a 51-minute documentary on why the CDPA is important. And it's through the University of New Caledonia, French Polynesia. That is linked on the info sheet. And then also in the chat is a click to send to Congress. Any Return Peace Corps volunteer can click that. It is through the MPCA, and it will go to your representative and your senators if you have an interest. Our biggest thing is we want co-sponsorships. That's what we've been working on. Also endorsements, but I was given the task of working on co-sponsorships. So through MPCA, through Return Peace Corps Volunteers for Environmental Action, and through this group, we are trying to build support by getting more co-sponsors of this bill, and
So
hope for the 119th Congress.
So, there's a lot of things we can be doing. I hope each one of you has picked up on some place that you might put your input in this month or within the next 30 days, or it may not matter. We're going to send out more information tomorrow and through the week from any of you who made presentations. We'll close with that. I do want to let Evelyn tell us about the next forum in December. Evelyn?
Need to. Yes, so on December 11th, we're going to showcase what a number of the RPCV groups and some individuals are doing to work directly with refugees who are already in this country or to sponsor them. And the whole idea of this showcase is to inspire people to do more of those kinds of ideas. So we'll be talking about how to get it organized, how to sustain it, what the benefits are to the group, and just give people ideas about things they could be doing in addition to advocacy. So it's a complement. It's not competition with advocacy.
And in
So I-
advocacy, we're going to have to build a new team this coming year for 2025. We're planning to have a seminar second week of January. Watch your inbox. Join us. The advocacy effort needs to sustain itself and even increase itself in the coming year. Thank you very much for everybody who joined us. We'll stay on, however, anybody who wishes to, if you have further questions or comments. I just wanted to end it up as close as we could to time. Any other thoughts, comments? And we'll look for more information coming from our presenters to pass along to you as well. I see Darcy Neal has her hand up in this way. Darcy.
So maybe I clicked the wrong one. I thought that
You
was.
did it.
We need younger tech savvy members on the committee.
Anne has saved us from extinction, so but we can't count on her forever. Let's just get some other people, especially some younger people involved, and we'll try to continue the communication and certainly advocacy. Any other comments? If we're ready to close, we'll let it go. We thank you all and for these excellent presentations. It is recorded. We will be able to share the recording. We hope you share it with your friends. Anything else as we close, Anne or Evelyn? Thank you so much. I guess we are finished for tonight, but not finished for the year.